Good evening, everyone. May I ask that anyone in front of a camera acknowledge and recognize that filming is going on this evening. And I would ask that you stay away from the cameras. We also ask if anyone has a cell phone, that you shut off your cell phone at this time. We would appreciate that. Again, please look around where the cameras are. The camera crew has asked that everyone recognize their existence tonight. We know it's a full house. Waiting for the signal. From the news truck. Pretty quiet so far. Good evening, everyone. My name is Augustino Ribeiro, and on behalf of the Portuguese Cultural Center, I welcome you to tonight's debate. This is standby. When he points to me, I go. Anyone have a few jokes? We're waiting for the camera crew. Cappiello. Stand by. 5, 4, 3, 2. Good evening, everyone. We've never been this important before. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Portuguese Cultural Center. On behalf of the Portuguese Cultural Center, I'd like to welcome you here and welcome you into a spirit of volunteers. As we all know, every campaign depends on in its core with its volunteers. This house, the facility you stand in today, was built by Portuguese Americans of the Danbury community, volunteers. This Portuguese Cultural Center stands as a monument to the volunteer efforts of many here in the Danbury community. And it is in that spirit that 14 years ago, the Portuguese community decided to sponsor congressional debates. And I'm proud to say that this is the 7th consecutive congressional debate that we've sponsored, and we believe it's the premier debate in the area. Thank you very much. I would like to now welcome our co-sponsor, the Danbury News Times, David Deere. Thank you.
Thank you, Augie. Hello again and welcome. I'm David Deere, publisher of the News Times, and I've been here in Danbury just a year now, but in the course of that year I've heard over and over again how important this night was in the congressional contest and how important it is to the overall debate that's presented to American citizens. It's encouraging to see so many people turn out this evening after 20 long months of presidential politics. It's great to see so many folks are still involved and interested in the democratic process. The News Times is proud to be a co-sponsor of such a valuable and important event. We have two fine candidates before us this evening, Chris Murphy and David Cappiello. These are challenging times ahead for us in America. Decisions made in Washington will have an enormous impact on our lives, our pocketbooks, the environment, and the world. It's important that we send the very best people to Congress to represent us. Tonight's debate will help us make help us make an educated vote on Tuesday. There are many people who have been working behind the scenes to make today's debate happen. I'd like to thank our moderator and panel of journalists. Of course, the Portuguese Cultural Center has been so gracious to host the event, and the Brookfield League of Women Voters have done a marvelous job in arranging tonight's debate. With that, I'd like to introduce Marge Davidson of the Brookfield League of Women Voters. Thank you again.
Thank you. Welcome on behalf of the Brookfield League of Women Voters. I too would like to thank our debate committee, our planning partners, Augie Ribeiro from the Portuguese Cultural Center, and Art Cummings, who is our contact person at the News Times. The Portuguese Cultural Center has again been so gracious to host the 5th Congressional District candidate debate. You do a great service to our community, and we thank you. The News Times has gone out of its way to publicize this event. We appreciate your efforts to keep the greater Danbury area informed and educated, and thank you. I'll tell you a little bit about tonight's debate. It's going to be divided into two sections. The first will be questions to the candidate from our distinguished panel at the other end of the stage. And I can't even see the order that you're sitting in, so when I introduce you, will you just acknowledge? First, I would like to introduce Hannah Brown. Hannah is a senior at Brookfield High School. And we're delighted that she's here tonight. She's even too young to vote, but she still is interested in this. Next, I would like to introduce Mark Davis, who many of you will recognize from TV. Mark is a political reporter from WTNH. Next, I would like to introduce Brian Coons, who is a political reporter from the Danbury News Times. And Emanuela Lima from the Tribuna Press. Thank you, panelists. In the second section of the debate, the candidates will ask questions of each other. We can look forward to some very lively exchanges, I believe. I would also like to introduce the timekeepers for the debate. Carol Elder and Ann McCarthy, right here in the front row, wave your arms, thank you, Carol and Ann are from the Danbury League of Women Voters. They will hold up 15-second warning sign for the candidates, and we'll ring a bell. Did you ring your bell? When time expires. And we expect the candidates will adhere to the timelines. Before I introduce the moderator, I would like to caution the audience to avoid demonstrations. Please be fair to each candidate. Save your enthusiasm for the end. Now our moderator. We have a very distinguished moderator this evening. Dr. Christopher Cook is an associate professor of political science at Western Connecticut State University. He's also the director of the WestCon Honors Program and the founder of the university's debate team. So gentlemen, he knows a thing or two about debates. Dr. Cook has received degrees from Boston University and Boston College. He has been an International Security Fellow at Harvard, as well as a counterintelligence agent for the United States Army. His research and publications focus both on cooperation and conflict over freshwater resources and the creation and sustainability of civil society. As you can see, he's well prepared to moderate tonight's debate. Dr. Cook.
First off, thanks, Marge, for that kind introduction. I'm going to go briefly over the rules of the debate. And Marge has said that there are two sections of the debate, and that is true for the candidates in terms of their answers and rebuttals. However, overall, there are 4 sections of this debate. The first is opening statements. The order was determined by a coin toss that happened just outside this room, and Congressman Murphy won that coin toss. He will be going first. They each have 3 minutes. The second section of the debate are panelist questions. We've determined that the panelists will ask the questions in alphabetical order. Each will have 2 questions. And the candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each respective question, and they will be afforded a 30-second rebuttal, 1 30-second rebuttal. And when I hear that nice little Tinkerbell go off, I will turn into a lion on that Tinkerbell. Senator Cappiello will be asked the first question from the panelists. Candidates then will question each other, as Marge said. They will have 2 questions to ask each other. The asking of the question will last no longer than 1 minute. In other words, there will be no speeches during that question. The answering of a question is limited to 2 minutes, and then the candidate asking the question is allowed a 1-minute rebuttal. Congressman Murphy will be asking the first question. Finally, in the closing statements, each candidate will again have 3 minutes for their closing statements. Closing statements will occur in the opposite order of the opening remarks. Therefore, Senator Cappiello will be going first. I want to emphasize one other option here. As the founding faculty member of the Roger Sherman Debate Society, I will enforce the time limit in a respectful manner. I expect that the candidates, after receiving that 15-second warning and then seeing the bell, they will be finishing and completing sentences. That is it. They must stop with that sentence after the bell is rung. Now, let's get to the opening statements. Congressman Murphy, 3 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Cook, for being a moderator. Thank you to our panelists here today. And truly thank you to the Portuguese Cultural Center here in Danbury for once again hosting this debate, along with your partners who have made this happen, League of Women Voters from Brookfield and from Danbury, along with the Danbury News-Times. Thank you to Senator Cappiello for once again joining me for what I hope will be an instructive and informative next hour and a half. And thank you to everyone in the audience for taking the time out to show your enthusiasm for this process and what I think we all agree is an election that we're all going to remember for the rest of our lives. For me, this is a year that I'll remember for more than just the reason of the election that stands before us. The most important event in my life by far, up until this moment, was not this election nor the one that took place 2 years ago, but an event that happened almost 8 weeks ago to the day, the birth of my first son, Kathy and I's first child, Owen. And as all of you know in this audience, when you look at your child, when you look at your grandchild, it gives you yet another reason to commit a little piece of yourself to public service in whatever way that you've chosen to do it. And for me, that certainly has been the case. But Owen comes into this world with a certain sense of trepidation on behalf of his father, wondering if I'm going to be able to leave him with a stronger country and a more stable economy, just as every generation through the great history of this country has been able to leave its children and its grandchildren. And it recommits me to the work that I set about going to Washington, D.C. 2 years ago. You see, I thought that we had fundamentally lost a connection with our government. in Washington, that the things that we were talking about back here in Danbury and Waterbury, Cheshire, where I live, the high cost of healthcare, the struggle that the middle class was going through, were things that weren't being listened to in Washington. That it seemed that the drug industry and the insurance industry, the oil companies, had captured the agenda down there and had captured too many voices of the people that we sent there. And the struggle that we had had for a very long time to get our voices heard was one that we were losing. So for my son, I first think about the mission ahead of us to try to make sure that that American dream, the one that allowed me to be a member of Congress after my forefathers came here from countries abroad, can still be realized. And so it means that I'm going to spend every waking moment of my time in, it's that quick, huh? 3 minutes. Wow. Trying to fight for that better world for my son, and to try to make him once again proud of the fact that his father has chosen to go into politics. That's the mission ahead of us for the next 2 years.
Senator Cappiello.
Thank you. I want to also thank the Brookfield League of Women Voters, the News Times, the Portuguese Cultural Center, and of course Chris Cook for moderating this debate. I also want to thank my family for being here, who fills this half of the room over here. Thank all of you. Of course, my beautiful wife Christine, who's here, my mom and dad, and my grandmother Sittu, Larissa Savi. Thank you. You know, I'm running for Congress because I don't understand a lot about my opponent and his friends in Washington. I don't understand how someone can vote for the largest tax increase in history and then say that they're fighting for the middle class. I don't understand how you can claim the day before you're sworn into office that you'd like to eliminate earmarks and then request $500 million in earmarks in less than 2 years. And I don't understand how you can be the champion of campaign finance reform and ethics reform and then accept the help from our former governor, John Rowland, for your campaign. Promises made on the campaign trail are often promises broken once you get to Congress. And it boils down to partisanship, a failure of people on both sides of the aisle to work together, but it also comes down to standing up to your own party leaders when necessary. My record in Hartford rejects that entire notion that you can't work with other members of the other side of the aisle or that you can't stand up to members of your own party. I brought Republicans and Democrats together here in the city of Danbury when it came to expanding cardiac care. Members who were here, right here in the audience, Representative Marianne Carson, David Scribner, and Jan Giegler, who are Republicans, Representative Bob Godfrey, a Democrat, and former Representative Lou Wallace, we all worked together to do that. We also worked to pass legislation to ensure that life-threatening metabolic disorders were tested every year in this state. I stood up to my own party, even when it was uncomfortable. Sometimes when it came to issues of budget, sometimes when it came to issues of ethics. I've stood up to people like our former governor when it was uncomfortable, when he was involved in corruption, and stood apart from my party. I was one of the first to call on him to resign. And even another friend of mine in the state Senate, who was a dear friend of mine, but was involved in some ethical lapses. And I had to stand up because I don't represent them in Hartford, and I don't represent them if I go to Washington, D.C. I represent all of you in this room. Change is the word of the day. Everyone likes to say change, and we do need change. But change doesn't happen by going along to get along. Change happens by standing up and making a difference. Change happens by saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to support that bill. It's not the right bill. I have to vote no. Let's work for the betterment of the people in our district. More importantly, there's a game that's played in Washington. A game where they point the fingers at one another and say it's your fault on the other side of the aisle, or it's your fault with the administration. We have to start by looking at ourselves, and that's how we're going to make change in Washington.
Thank you, Congressman Murphy and Senator Cappiello. We are now moving on to the second section of the debate with panelist questions, starting with Ms. Brown. Now, each candidate will have the opportunity to respond to this question and have 2 minutes to do so. Also, each candidate will be giving a 30-second rebuttal. We are starting with Ms. Brown asking Senator Cappiello the first question.
Senator Cappiello, the current banking system crisis has been blamed on lack of regulation, transparency, and ethics, and loose lending practices, among other things. What do you see as the main causes, and what are the most important changes that you hope to make to the system in order to get the country out of the current crisis and to prevent a future crisis?
Thank you. I think the first issue is that Congress and the administration in the last number of years in both parties dropped the ball on this issue. Expanding home ownership is a laudable goal. Everyone wants to own a home in this country. It's the American dream. But we have to make sure that the people that are buying homes can actually afford those homes. Well, over the years, there were regulations under Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government-backed agencies, quasi-public agencies, that were told they had to expand their guidelines for home ownership, where people were buying homes not with 20% down, but with 10% down, 5%, sometimes with no money down. Now, calls were made to reform that system, but those calls were unheard. I think, first of all, we need to start by saying we're not going to allow Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, these quasi-public agencies, to give campaign contributions to members of Congress, especially those that serve in the Financial Services Committee. Second, we need to start looking at bringing back the systems that were in place years ago that got us into trouble. Now, this current bailout that we've heard about, that's over $700 billion, I was absolutely unequivocally opposed to. There was no reformation of the system. There were no safeguards in place for the taxpayers that my two young sons, Jack and Jude, that are 3 and 1 years old, are going to be paying off for the rest of their lives. There was nothing whatsoever to ensure that executives and CEOs didn't get bonuses. Just this week, we're finding out that out of these $700+ billion that were spent, $70 billion may be going to CEOs and executives' pay from those banks. Henry Waxman, a Democrat, chairman of the Government Reform Committee in Washington, is saying that might happen now. How can we pass a bill in Congress without truly having those reforms in place and truly having the oversight, especially when thrown into that bill were billions of dollars in pork for wooden arrows, for rum dealers, for NASCAR? That's simply not the right way to go.
Congressman.
This is fundamentally about trying to stem what could be and could have been the greatest economic crisis that this country has faced since the 1930s. Those are the stakes that were in front of us when the legislation was put before Congress, and frankly, the stakes that still remain in front of us now. To me, as a new member of Congress, it probably would have been easy for me to stand there and say, you know what, I'm going to vote against any legislation that comes before us to try to responsibly address this crisis, because I wasn't there when things went wrong, and so I'm not going to be part of the solution. But the alternative to doing something was doing nothing, to allowing the banking system to fail around us and resulting in devastation to our business community, the absolute freezing of credit that we rely on to continue to grow our economy. This wasn't an easy or fun vote for any of us, but it was a responsible vote. And there are significant safeguards in this bill to not only put restrictions on the CEO pay of the executives who take part in it, but also to make sure that we get a return on our investment. But the question is about what do we do going forward, and I think that's the critical component. This is just a tourniquet on an economy, frankly, that has been in crisis for a very long time. You ask middle-class families in Danbury whether the economy just lurched into crisis 2 months ago, and they look at you with a pretty quizzical look, because for families here, they've been in crisis for a long time. Wages remaining flat, healthcare costs, energy costs going up. We have to rebuild our economy based on those middle-class families. We've got to cut taxes for them, cut taxes for the small businesses that they work for, and go back and do the work that Congress has not done over the past 10 years. The fact is, as soon as the Democrats took control of Congress, within 4 months, we passed a reform bill through the House of Fannie and Freddie that the Republican Congress did not do for the 12 years that it controlled it. Had they done it, we wouldn't be in the position that we are now. We have to continue on that path.
30 seconds.
Thank you. I can't believe what I'm hearing. It was the Democrats in Congress, it was Barney Frank, it was Chris Dodd that stopped any reformation from taking place. In the last 2 years, you have served in the Financial Services Committee, Congressman, and you have done nothing to warn people about this crisis. And then when this bill was passed, it was $700 billion. Statements were made that there would be no CEO bonuses and benefits, and now we're reading in the papers that will happen. You ran on no pork and earmarks, but yet there was billions of dollars in pork and earmarks in this bill. That's simply unacceptable.
30 seconds.
Again, it's simply not true. Within 4 months, I'm happy to forward you the vote count. The Democratic Congress passed the strongest reform of Fannie and Freddie in a generation, and in addition, passed a predatory lending bill that would stop the abusive lending practices that led us to this position in the first place, all happening within the first year of the Democrats taking control of Congress. This is a bipartisan problem. I'm not suggesting that Republicans were responsible for us getting into this mess, but instead of the blame game, we've got to step forward and start talking about what our solutions are going forward.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're moving on to our second panelist question from Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis.
This is a bit of a follow-up. Everyone who talks about this issue gives us these big picture answers, but it would be nice to sort of narrow it down. Congressman Murphy, you voted for the $700 billion rescue plan. How do you think that's going to come down and affect the several hundred people in this room and their families, and the others who may be watching it on television throughout the district?
Again, this is about what's happening here in Danbury, what's happening in Waterbury. This is about stepping in and trying to avert a crisis like this country has not seen in 70 years. What we were faced with was the failure of the banking system, was a collapse, one that we have not witnessed in several generations. And so the most immediate effect is that we have been able to preserve that system, which feeds the payrolls of small businesses and big businesses. We have been able to keep credit going to both families and to the businesses that employ people here in the Danbury area. And what do we do specifically going forward? This is about recognizing the fact that there's a reason why community banks here in Danbury and throughout Connecticut have survived this crisis, because they didn't engage in the kind of abusive lending and the kind of lax underwriting that the Wall Street firms have engaged in over the last 10 years. So specifically, what do we do going forward? We apply the same underwriting standards that local community banks have used to the entire lending industry. That will fix a lot of this problem going forward, and will make sure that we never get into this type of crisis again. But this is about confronting an economic moment like we have not seen in this country in, again, several generations. And my hope is that it's very easy for Senator Cappiello or others to stand from the outside and criticize this bill. We worked incredibly hard to make it a better bill, even as unpalatable as it was for many of us to support this kind of intervention into the economic system. But throughout this campaign, all we've heard from Senator Cappiello on this issue and most every other is criticism. I think this district is looking for more than that. I think this district would like to hear from Senator Cappiello specifically what he would have done in the alternative. He said he wouldn't sit back and do nothing, but we have yet to hear in 2 months since the bill was passed a specific outline of what the alternative would be. I think we'd like to hear that tonight.
Senator Cappiello.
Thank you. The first thing I would do if I were in your shoes, Congressman, is give back over the $250,000 you've received from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, JP Morgan Chase, Countrywide, and all the rest of the groups that you oversee on the committee, the Financial Services Committee. That would be the first step to ensure that your vote is pure on this issue. Second, I can tell you that another thing that's happened with this bill is it's piled on approximately $2,300 in debt in one vote on every single American in this country. $2,300 in one vote. Now, our debt has gone from, in the last year and a half, $9.5 trillion after this bill to $11.4 trillion. That means it went from the last 2 years, $31,000 to $37,000 in less than 2 years while you have served in Congress. Now, the first thing I would have done if I were a member is to say to the president, hold on, that's a huge bill. I know it's 3 pages long, which was irresponsible, by the way, on the president's part. Irresponsible that a 3-page bill that cost $700 billion. But I don't know how one can say that we worked really hard on this bill when within a week and a half that a 450-page document was created that was voted on such a massive undertaking of such great importance. That never happens. That's a huge bill, $700 billion. I would have taken a step back. I would have looked at eliminating for 2 years the capital gains tax to put more liquidity in the market. I would have had Wall Street look at setting up a system so that it pays into a system that it insures itself so the taxpayers aren't footing the bill that can be backed by the Treasury, like the FDIC. There are a number of things that could have been considered, but this Congress decided, and by the way, it's not just Democrats down there, it was Republicans, it was the president. They decided to rush a bill through without the oversight in place. We all know it, we've read it in the papers. Again, the CEOs are going to get big bonuses. There was no reformation of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This is a big problem, and there was not enough thought put into the bill.
30-second rebuttal.
This notion that we should just have Wall Street insure itself is a fiction. Now, going forward, a system like the FDIC for investment banks makes sense, but that was not going to salvage our banking system. Cutting the capital gains tax rate for the few individuals who have any gains from capital investments was not going to solve the banking crisis. You know, these are all great sound bites, but this is the real world in which we were about to see an economy collapse around us. And we need a little bit more specificity than those type of broad brush fictional solutions.
Senator Cappiello.
The first thing you could have done, Congressman, is said no. You could have taken a step back and said you're rushing this through. And it isn't fiction. There are people in this audience who do have small nest eggs, minor nest eggs that they've been saving away for years, but they might want to change what their investments are. And because of the capital gains, if you get rid of the capital gains altogether for 2 years, you're giving them the ability to freely move their money around and not be penalized. So you can make a joke about it, because I know you love tax increases, and you have for the last 10 years of service, but you need to start being realistic and helping the middle class.
Moving on to our third panelist question. Mr. Coons, your question is going to Senator Cappiello.
Senator Cappiello, earlier this year, the federal government sent economic stimulus packages to American taxpayers, stimulus checks rather, I should say. There's a movement afoot for another round of economic stimulus checks. Do you support a second round of economic stimulus checks for taxpayers? And does supporting this measure constitute spreading the wealth, a phrase we've heard a lot this campaign season?
Well, again, the first thing I have to do is look at the details of what this package is. But they're talking about $300 billion. Now, I can't just look at a bill and say, yes, I support $300 billion. That would be irresponsible for me to do that unless I saw and read the details of that bill. But there was a first round of economic stimulus checks that went to people. And I will tell you this, I don't understand how one can support a one-time check of $300, $600, or $1,200 and think that's going to stimulate the economy, but on the other hand, vote for a permanent tax increase of $4,000 for the average filer in the 5th District in Connecticut. It doesn't make sense. Either you believe more money in your pockets means something and will help you, or you don't. I would like to see permanent tax relief for the people in this room and the middle class in this country, not simply a check. And I also think that it should be the people that are paying the taxes that get the tax money back. I don't believe in simply redistributing the wealth. That's not the right way to tax people. The way to tax people is to think about what services we need to provide to the citizens of our country. And then think about the fairest way to bring that money in without penalizing people for their success. Now, there have been many differences between the two of us in the state Senate. The business entity tax, which affects small business owners like my dad. He pays $250 a year for no reason whatsoever, for the sake of owning a business in Connecticut. Even if he loses money, he's paying that. I oppose that. My opponent supported that. The real estate conveyance tax increase. That hurts people, even if they lose money on the sale of their home. My opponent supported that increase. I oppose it. The nursing home bed tax that my opponent created and crafted to pass along $5,000 per year for anyone who pays for a nursing home bed. I opposed, my opponent supported that. We clearly are different on how we oppose whose money your money belongs to, you or the government.
I think you'll hear today Senator Cappiello talk about a lot of things that he's voted against, and he's right. Most every important measure that's come before the state legislature, Senator Cappiello has voted against, many of them. We'll talk about budgets today, we'll talk about the stem cell legislation. It's easy to be against things, but let's talk about what we're for here. Let's talk about the actual record, the facts on what's happened in Washington, in Congress over the last 2 years. $300 billion in tax cuts for individuals, $44 billion in new tax cuts for small businesses, not a single tax increase. This sort of Republican talking point that comes from the Republican National Committee about the largest tax increase in history is made up. If you ask Senator Cappiello on the way out which tax he's talking about and how much it's been increased, what that will result in on your filings next year, he won't be able to tell you because it doesn't exist. It's based off of some non-binding resolution passed by the United States Congress. So let's talk about those specific numbers. $44 billion in tax cuts for small businesses, $300 billion for individuals. I think that record is a real one, and I think it points to what the direction should be going forward regarding an economic stimulus package. We need to look at next year, as we come back into Congress, that same type of revenue relief for small businesses that are going to grow the next wave of an economy. Let's focus in on giving tax breaks to Americans, middle-class Americans, who are going to be the basis of our economy going forward. And let's look at some strategic investments. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to make sense to hand checks to people that might benefit the economy in the short term when we really have long-term economic foundational questions to grapple with. But let's look at something like infrastructure funding. Right here in Danbury, one of the greatest impediments to growing our economy here is the fact that a lot of our mobility, both in people and goods, are trapped by our lack of rail infrastructure to and from New York, the highways that get clogged up far too often as we go east and west and north and south from here. I think it does make sense to make some targeted infrastructure investments, which unlocks a lot of our frozen economy, but also puts people to work building those roads and bridges.
30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. I didn't hear any specifics there either, Congressman Murphy, but let me just give you a quote from one of your colleagues, freshman Democrat, Bill Foster of Illinois, who called your vote on repealing the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts by letting them expire. He said, and I quote, "It raises taxes on the middle class. It's an average tax increase of $4,000 for the average filer in the 5th District by letting them expire." True, it's not happening now. It's happening after the next Congress is sworn into office.
Right, it's happening after the next
I'm sorry,
Congress is...
are we going back and forth?
Yes, it's 30-second rebuttal for Congressman Murphy.
Right, it is happening after the next Congress is sworn into office. The vote hasn't taken place yet. What you're referring to is some resolution that came before Congress setting 5-year budget parameters. The question has yet to come before the United States Congress. Now, do I think that we should be reauthorizing another $16 billion in tax cuts for the oil companies? No, I think that can be better spent on families. I think there's going to be some tax cuts that we've given to some industries that we're going to have to take a look at. And frankly, I think I outlined a pretty clear specific in terms of putting investments into our infrastructure that I think would be of great benefit to the people here in the city of Danbury and the surrounding communities.
Thank you. Moving on to the 4th question from Ms. Lima. Ms. Lima, your question is to Congressman Murphy.
Congressman Murphy, in an interview for the Tribune newspaper last summer, you stated that an overhaul immigration reform needed to be, quote, realistic about the future of millions of undocumented workers in this country. In your opinion, what would be a realistic approach to the legal status of the 12 million undocumented workers and families that you as a congressman would feel comfortable to vote in favor of?
Several months back, I was knocking doors in Bethlehem, Connecticut, and I knocked on the door of a small contractor who does home improvement works around the area. And he said to me, "Chris, you got to do something about immigration. You've got to find a way to bridge the divide here, because I don't hire undocumented workers, but my competitors do, and they're undercutting me every day. And I'm going to be forced to do something I don't want to do very soon." This is a crisis for many of our small employers, and Congress needs to find a way to come together. I'm absolutely critical of the fact that the United States Senate and the United States Congress has not found a way to bridge this gap. But you're going to have to find a way to reach a compromise. That compromise starts with border enforcement. We've added thousands of border agents across the United States borders, Canada and Mexico, but we need to do more, both with personnel and with fencing. We need to enforce the laws that are on the books today and give employers the tools with which to exercise that enforcement. We need to fix the existing immigration system to say that we do have a labor need in this country and it should be filled through the legal immigration system, and if we need to raise quotas from all around the world in order to do that, let's do that to encourage legal immigration. But we do have to be logical about the fact that we have 12 to 14 million people here without documentation, and we're going to have to find a sensible solution. We're going to have to create some lines by which people who have been here for a period of time get to at least get in line to stay here, or at least get to stay here for an extended period of time to continue working. It just isn't going to be logistically possible to get rid of everybody. And in a compassionate country, I have to feel that we can find a way. The fact is that's the only way that you're going to actually get a bill done. That's what stopped us from moving this bill forward. It was people that, with shouts of no amnesty, no amnesty. This isn't amnesty. This is setting up a sensible way in which to compassionately and effectively allow for a resolution of the millions of people who are here right now.
You have 2 minutes, Senator Cappiello.
The big myth is that someone cannot apply for citizenship legally. Anyone can apply to become a U.S. citizen and get into line. That's the system that we have in place right now. We have a rule of law in this country. We have a rule of law, and if we don't expect people who are here illegally to abide by the law, how do we expect our own U.S. citizens to abide by that law? The Congressman and I have very different views on this. I know he said it was the saddest day in his years in Congress, a few years in Congress, when the immigration bill had failed. But you know what? It was amnesty in that bill. There was amnesty for people to become citizens. And I don't think it's right. I think about all of the immigrants, people who are abroad, who are trying to come here legally, who are fighting to come here the right way. People who are here legally and who have done it the right way. To say to someone who's done it illegally, you can get to the front of the line, I just don't think that's the right response. Now, we've had some differing views in the state Senate as well with regards to these issues. When there was a bill that was going to give illegal immigrants in-state tuition at their colleges and universities here in Connecticut, my opponent supported that. I opposed it because I was looking at the issue of fairness. If I had someone here in Danbury whose son or daughter wanted to go to UConn, and since UConn only accepts 70% of the students from within the state, if we're allowing someone who's here illegally to get that spot, that means that one of your children won't get that spot, and you've been paying taxes here your entire life. That's not fair. There were 3 votes that the Senate Democrat chairman had brought up, the transportation chairman, to make sure to close the loophole so that illegal immigrants don't have driver's licenses in Connecticut. Now, I supported that bill. My opponent opposed that bill. It's not just an issue of immigration, it's an issue of national security. A driver's license is a de facto ID, national ID. And my opponent has also voted to gut some of the security, the money for border security while he's in Congress. We have to secure our borders, not just for immigration, but for national security.
30-second rebuttal.
Well, we've put, again, billions of dollars into new fencing and into new border patrol agents. But the fact is, so long as we have people who are irreconcilable about this issue of how we deal with the people that are in this country, we're not going to get any reform passed. We have to have some sensible means of passing a comprehensive immigration bill, or this problem will fester for a long time to come. This is a very difficult issue to bridge the gap on, and Senator Cappiello talks a lot about trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together. This is a critical issue in which we have to show not only some compassion, but some common sense to try to get something done.
30-second rebuttal.
And there is a way to show compassion and common sense. It was an idea called the Guest Worker Program. It was an idea that ended up turning into amnesty. We should look at people who are here, people who want to come here and work legally. When the Department of Labor shows that there's a shortage, that American workers cannot work there, we can allow people to become guest workers. That's the right way to do things. But amnesty simply is not. We are a nation of laws. We must abide by them. We must ask everyone else to abide by them.
Okay, since we are reversing course in terms of the panelists in alphabetical order, Ms. Lima, you get the next question, and that question is targeted at Senator Cappiello.
Thank you. Senator Cappiello, on your website, under immigration, you cover border security and immigration reform, but yet you make no mention of what you would do as a solution for, again, the estimated 12 to 14 million undocumented immigrants who work and raise families in the United States. Specifically, Senator, what do you see as a feasible solution to these 12 million people currently in this country?
Thank you. To follow up my last answer, I would start by looking at the Guest Worker Program. Now, the President came up with this idea a number of years ago because look, we can all admit There are farmers out west who need workers. There are restaurants in this area who need workers. There are contractors who need workers. But right now, we have a system in place where you have some contractors here in the city of Danbury who are hiring people legally, paying workers' compensation costs, paying unemployment compensation costs, paying insurance costs, paying taxes on the workers, and other people who are hiring people illegally and undercutting those workers. Now, on the state level, I was able to pass a bill last year that targeted this specific issue to make sure that contractors weren't hiring people illegally to avoid paying all those costs, to set up a system of fairness. And the Department of Labor is now enforcing that law. But the guest worker program is the best way to deal with this situation of our labor shortage. But I still come back to, out of the, sometimes people say 12 million, some say 14 million, as a congressman did a couple of nights ago, in another debate, some say 20 million. People who are here illegally, we simply cannot just say, I am giving you amnesty and you will become a citizen. If you pay $5,000 or $10,000, if you've lived here for 3 years, you might get this amnesty. If you live here 5 years, you get that. It's not fair to those that are fighting to come here legally. It's not fair to those who came here legally. So I look to the guest worker program, but I will say it here, the congressman can say it's baiting, but I will not support amnesty, and we have to secure our borders. The congressman is right. More money is spent on border security, but he voted to take money away from border security. That simply isn't right.
Well, let me give you the facts. Let me give you the numbers. You can, listen to accusations, or you can actually look to see what's happened. In the last 2 years, 5,200 new border officers have been authorized. $2.3 billion in new money for additional fencing. Those are real numbers. You can look them up. They're there. They're real. And I think it's an important step forward on what has to be that first step in securing this country. This is about national security, and we still have a long way to go. But again, we're not going to get there. For all of Senator Cappiello's talk about bipartisanship, we're not going to get there if people aren't willing to try to bridge the divide that divides this entire country. And I think it's a shame that we have allowed this divide to fester for so long, because this country should be proud of our history of immigration, what makes us so strong as a nation, that we've been able to bring in Senator Cappiello's ancestors, my ancestors, to construct a great nation out of it. I think that the way in which we address this issue, by sort of taking out the demagoguery and the sound bites and trying to really get down to how we solve it, could be a celebration of what is great about this nation. I know there are all sorts of things to be against. I think there are all sorts of things to be angry about. But to me, immigration reform is one of those examples in which we can step forward and try to find a path that reminds us of why we love this country so much in the long run. We have to also ask the question of why do we have a system and an economy now that demands all of this labor from abroad? Senator Cappiello talks about a guest worker program. I would rather acknowledge that we have a labor need that we need to fill and allow for the appropriate immigration to fill it. Instead of creating a subclass of workers that will come here only for a period of time and then have to be sent back, won't enjoy the rights that other workers have, let's acknowledge that we need to bring potentially more people to this country from all over the world and allow that to happen. I think if we do that, if we can sensibly sit down and try to resolve this issue, we'll be proud to be a country of immigrants and be reminded why we've been so proud for 200 years.
3-second rebuttal.
Congressman Murphy, I am proud to be ancestor, the grandson of legal Italian and Lebanese immigrants. I am so proud. But the word legal is important here. It's very important. I come back to the fact that we are a nation of laws. Those numbers may be correct, but guess what? You still voted to lower those numbers. You voted to gut our border security. You cannot deny that. There are votes on the House floor where you did that. And we can deal with this issue compassionately. But Ronald Reagan, one of my political heroes, tried amnesty in 1986, but then they didn't secure our borders. That was a little over 1 million illegal immigrants. Now we have over 12 million.
Okay, moving on to the next panelist question. Mr. Coons, your question is to Congressman Murphy.
Congressman Murphy, this month the Connecticut Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. Connecticut joined Massachusetts and California as the only states in the country to offer gay and lesbian couples the right to marry. Opponents of gay marriage claim that same-sex marriage violates the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. But according to a March 2008 report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 49.3% essentially one half of traditional marriages in the United States end in divorce. What is your position on same-sex marriage, and is it possible to call something sacred even if it fails 50% of the time?
Well, for people like my parents who have been happily married for over 30 years, it is a sacred institution, and it remains a sacred institution. And it's one that we can support in a number of different ways, not just with the laws that underlie the word marriage, but with policies that make strong families be able to persevere, with economic policies that help those families that are struggling to pay the bills, struggling to put their kids through college, be able to live that American dream. I was a proud supporter of Connecticut civil union law. I don't believe that the state of Connecticut or any government should discriminate against those based on their sexual orientation, just as I don't believe that you should discriminate against people based on their race, their ethnicity, or the place from which they come. And I don't believe so long as the state of Connecticut or any institution is conferring certain rights or privileges upon people that they should be able to discriminate. I don't think that churches should be forced into performing marriages that they don't agree with people that they disagree with. But so long as the government is involved, I think we have a right to treat everyone equally. And that's the foundation upon which our country is built, a sense of civil liberties that all Americans enjoy. One, I think that we have far too often in the last 2 years walked away from. But when we talk about that sacred institution, I come back to where I began. That yes, I do believe that you've got to extend rights to people of both sexes and all sexual orientation. But I think that in order to go back and strengthen those marriages, to strengthen those families, to make sure that we have both strong marriages and strong full families, you've got to go back and try to figure out why we have had an economy that has made more money for people at the very top of the echelon but has shrunk the middle class. You've got to fund programs like Head Start in our school systems so that we can help parents do the work that they've been doing with their children. Those are all parts of how we preserve and strengthen the institution of marriage.
Cappiello.
My opponent says I don't answer questions. The question was, do you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman? And I believe that it is. I don't support the Supreme Court's ruling. Now, Congressman, you and I both agreed in the civil union bill. And I bucked many people in my own party for supporting that. And people in my own family who gave me a hard time about that. I was born and raised Catholic, and obviously it wasn't the most popular vote in the Catholic Church, but I still brought out an amendment on the Senate floor to define marriage as being between one man and one woman. Because I do believe there's something about marriage. Now, I voted for that amendment. You opposed that amendment. That's a clear difference, and it's understandable. I support the fact and respect the fact that that's where you stand. But I don't like that the Supreme Court has now decided to take it upon themselves to throw out our law and say that marriage is can be between two men or two women. I simply don't support it. And I'd like to hear the answer to the question, whether you support the Supreme Court ruling or whether you believe marriage is between one man and one woman.
Well, we can agree on this. I don't like the fact when the Supreme Court steps in and tries to do the business of the legislature. I think the legislature should step in, especially on these important issues, and legislate. But whether it is marriage or civil unions, I mean, let me be clear. As long as the state government or any government institution is conferring that right, I think that people of all sexual orientation, of all gender, of all ethnicity have a right to it. I don't think that we should force religious institutions who don't want to perform those to do that, but I think so long as it is a government right, it needs to be equally distributed.
I still didn't hear the answer to the question.
Here's the answer.
You didn't give an answer.
Please refrain from clapping, please.
We both support civil unions. I think marriage is between one man and one woman and believe that should be in statute and oppose the Supreme Court ruling. Do you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman?
I'm going to answer the question again that has been presented. To the extent that we are conferring marriage or civil unions, yes, it needs to be applied directly and equally to people of all sexual orientations. I don't know how many different ways I can present this, but again, that does not mean that we should force religious institutions to have to perform those, but to the extent that you get that certificate from a civil government, it has to be distributed equally. I think it's an issue of civil rights, and I understand that this is one that we all have family members that disagree with, in my family and in yours. But to me, this is a fundamental issue of civil rights, that as it applied to people of different races and as it applied to people of different genders, I do believe that it should also apply to people of differing sexual orientation.
Okay, and we're moving on to the next question. I want, first off, please, remember, as Marge said when we started, please refrain from clapping and cheering. We're trying to get through all the questions, and the longer you do that, we're not going to get to all the questions. So please, try to refrain from clapping. Now, on to question number 7 from Mr. Davis. Your question, Mr. Davis, is going to Senator Cappiello.
Well, actually, I wasn't planning to ask this, but I have to now because of the previous question. And this is not really a federal question, but it's logical to follow up right now, because you both have spent a considerable amount of time in the General Assembly. Appearing on the ballot next week with you, along with everyone else who's running for office statewide, should the state of Connecticut have a constitutional convention, and the people who are advocating a yes vote are doing so because they would like to see the process of initiative petition for the purpose of getting issue referenda on the ballot. For example, should marriage only be between a man and a woman, to amend the Constitution through that method? Do you believe the residents of the state of Connecticut should vote yes or no on question 1?
That's to me.
Senator Cappiello, yes.
Thank you. Now, people on both sides of this issue, so everyone here understands, there is a constitutional question on the ballot, number 1, this election. Now, there are people on both sides who are trying to use it to make it issue-oriented. It's not. It is a question that comes up every 20 years, whether this state wants to have a constitutional convention to take a look at our Constitution. And then it would appoint, the legislature would then appoint members in both parties, hopefully, to come up with what questions should be asked in this constitutional convention. And then the voters would have a chance to decide whether to vote for those constitutional changes. One of those is initiative and referendum, giving you, the people in this room, a direct voice in Hartford, in this state, on specific issues. And I do support that because it's giving more power to the people in this room. Unfortunately, though, there are people on both sides who are trying to use it and say it's either evil or good based upon a specific issue. It shouldn't be looked at that way. It should be looked at giving you, the people, all of us, individual power as to what happens in the state and our Constitution. So I support it.
Yeah, I think that there could be some good that comes out of a constitutional convention. I know that there are many, as Senator Cappiello said, that fear what might come out of that in terms of the ability for questions like the one presented to the Supreme Court to be resolved, for other extraneous material to be put into the Constitution. But I don't necessarily think that we should be afraid of having a conversation about the fundamental governing document of our state. Again, this is going to be a democratic process. I think Senator Cappiello and I can agree on this, that this isn't going to be something done by legislative fiat, that if the citizens of this state want to go forward with the Constitution, there will be members, representatives of the entire state that will take part in that Constitution. Some great things in this state have come from some really seminal moments at these constitutional conventions. And, frankly, lots of my friends, lots of people in the Democratic Party are advocating against it. Frankly, I'm not as fearful of what might come from that. And I think it might actually result in some beneficial changes for the state.
You have 30-second rebuttal.
I think we agreed.
All right, we're actually moving forward. For the last question, Ms. Brown, your question is to Congressman Murphy.
In light of the current economic crisis, how do you propose to make higher education more affordable for both lower-income students and middle-class students who may not qualify for traditional financial aid?
Well, thank you very much for that question. This is, Senator Cappiello and I both have spoken very recently to Danbury High School students, and this is a question that I would imagine came up in both of our visits there, because this is really a fundamental question, not just for students, but for families. who are struggling to try to get their kids to college. And to me, this is just an issue of fairness, that your ability to pay should not be the barrier to students being able to get higher education. The strength of our economy is based in our workforce, and the fact that we still have the most productive, best educated workforce in the nation. I'm proud of the work that we've done in the last 2 years on this issue. In this Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, we were able to pass the largest increase in student aid funding since the GI Bill was passed, a bill that would lower the student loan interest rate in half, from 6.8 to 3.4%. That's a $4,000 savings for the average student, increasing the Pell Grant by $500 a year, and making a compact with students who decide to go into public service professions, that if you stay in that profession for a period of 10 years, whether it be nursing or teaching or law enforcement, that we'll forgive all or a portion of your student loans. But we still had a lot of work to do. And it's really a question of priorities. One of the reasons that I oppose the war in Iraq, one of the reasons why I believe that Congress should set a timetable to withdraw our forces from that field of battle, not just because I think that it's compromising our national security, but because I think we can spend that money better here at home. That $10 million a month can be spent on increasing our commitment to those students who see too many barriers to getting that college education. And so it's a matter to me of shifting resources, building upon really a success that hasn't gotten enough attention in the last 2 years, that will save thousands for students, and recommitting ourselves to building on that fundamental strength of our American economy, the strength of our workforce and our educational system.
Senator Cappiello.
Thank you. I don't fundamentally disagree with my opponent on this issue. I'm very, very proud of my work in the state legislature in a number of years for a tuition freeze that we had passed for all students who go to our state colleges and universities. We've had some of the largest increases in educational funding in our state's history of the last 2 years on a bipartisan effort. I look here at Western Connecticut State University and the work that we've done since I've been in office, how different Western is from when I went there many years ago, when we used to park in a mud pit, and now it's just a beautiful, beautiful school with great opportunities for all of our students. But since my opponent and I agree on the fundamental issue of trying to get more young people educated and make it more affordable to them, he had brought up the war, so I'm going to bring up something else. Now, I know the war has been very, very costly, and the Congressman and I have not differed on many issues with regards to the war. But we look at the cost of the war, and it's about $700 billion over the last number of years. And I'm going to come back to the $700 billion bailout and to what it's going to cost those same students who are going to school, those same students, and the debt that they're going to be carrying, the burden that they are going to carry. I think about right now, $37,000 debt that my 2 sons are starting out with because of the massive spending increases by Congress. You can't simply say you're for everything that spends more money. You have to think about where you can save money. You do have to prioritize, and sometimes you have to say no. Sometimes you have to look through and find every bit of waste you can in our federal government. But sometimes you just have to say no, to say, if we're going to make education a priority, we have to cut back somewhere else. In the last 2 years, that hasn't happened. Because like I said, our debt, national debt, has gone from $9.5 trillion to $11.4 trillion after that $700 billion is spent. That's an awful lot of money. In one vote, it cost almost as much as the entire Iraq war.
For a while there, I thought we were going to go 2 in a row with no rebuttals. There we go. 30 seconds.
Well, I will come back to the war because that is, I think, one of the biggest cost savings for this country, an opportunity to reinvest. And there is a difference between Senator Cappiello and I on this issue. I believe that if you entrust me with your vote, that I should exercise it to try to end this war. Senator Cappiello does not believe that. He does not believe that Congress should step in and have anything to say about when this war ends. If that's the prescription for this country, then that's an invitation to spend far more than $700 billion more on this war, especially if one of the presidential candidates gets elected and wants to stay there for another 100 years.
Senator Cappiello. Senator Cappiello.
Thank you. First of all, my opponent talks about saving money by pulling the troops out of Iraq. When he then says at other debates he would send them all to Afghanistan. So where is the savings, Congressman? Where is the savings? And you and I fundamentally agree about going into this war. We shouldn't have gone. But we have to be realistic. Today, another province was secured and was handed over to the Iraqi government. Our troops are withdrawing. The President and Senator Barack Obama and Senator John McCain have all agreed that they want to withdraw troops over time. No one has set a timeline. You voted for a timeline, but with $20 billion of domestic pork in that bill. That's playing with our soldiers' lives for domestic pork.
All right, we're moving on to the next portion of our debate where the candidates will question one another. I want to remind the candidates the rules of this section. The rules of this section, you'll be able to ask each of your, opposing candidate 2 questions. You will have a 1-minute time limit on your question, and we will be timing the question. Your response, you will have 2 minutes, and then the questioner will have a 1-minute rebuttal. That's it. So 1 minute to ask the question, 2-minute answer, 1-minute rebuttal. And this, we'll start off with Congressman Murphy asking the first question.
Well, I think this is a great piece of the debate, and I hope we use it to really tease out some of the visions from both of us. And so I'm going to stick with the issue of national security and foreign policy and try to have a real discussion about this. Whether we leave in the next year or the next 5 years, we're going to have to move beyond Iraq. We are going to have to confront a variety of challenges that have arisen to this nation, whether it be from North Korea, Russia, Iran, Syria. I guess my question to Senator Cappiello is, how do you see our foreign policy unfolding, and how do you prioritize, after we move forward from our commitment in Iraq, our response to a lot of these emerging threats, and how should we decide as a country, based on our own national security needs, how we engage in those crises going forward?
2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the question, Congressman. I believed in what candidate George W. Bush believed in 8 years ago. I don't believe that we are a nation who are there to build other nations. We are not nation builders. I think that this country has to make a decision whether we're going to have an overall interventionist strategy with regards to individual countries, or we're going to pick and choose. Now, I prefer that we only engage in wars and put our soldiers at risk when there is an absolute and utter direct threat to our nation. This is, again, where you and I have agreed. I opposed the war. I opposed the surge. But I have to be realistic and pragmatic about what is going on right now in Iraq. I have to realize that that nation has been stabilized due to the surge, even if I was opposed to it. And I'd like to see us withdraw our troops as quickly as possible. And moving forward, I think that when it comes to Iran, for instance, we should let lower-level individuals in our government negotiate with the Iranian officials. I don't believe our president should be negotiating directly without preconditions with Ahmadinejad, because I think you have to start somewhere. Even with Henry Kissinger, who I was able to meet a number of months ago, said in the paper not too long ago, he said, you cannot start by having the nation's leaders negotiate when they dislike each other, because if things don't work out, then there's no other recourse. You have to start building from the ground up. There were negotiations with China for 2 years before our president met with the leader of China, President Nixon, to start to have better relations. We need to have negotiations. We need our president, whether it be Barack Obama or John McCain, to sit down with Israel and the Palestinian people from day one to try and work things out and negotiate a peaceful 2-state settlement over there. So I do believe we have to be engaged, but I don't think that we can simply pick and choose where we start wars.
1 minute rebuttal.
Not necessarily a rebuttal, but in addition, Senator Cappiello talked about the fact that I would want to shift all of our troops to Afghanistan. We absolutely are not going to shift all of our troops there, but we do have to recognize the critical difference between Iraq and Afghanistan. It's from Afghanistan that this country was attacked, and it's there that the Taliban is regrouping and potentially restarting its havens for the terrorist movement. We do have to go back into that country with some additional forces, but some real additional help for the infrastructure of that country. There's a saying that where the roads end in Afghanistan, the Taliban begins. We have to help them get government out to their people. And the reason that I do support a timetable is because I think we also have to understand that Iran's hand has been strengthened in the Middle East in large part because of the destabilizing effect that our war in Iraq has had. And so my commitment to bring us out of that region, to withdraw our forces from Iraq, is part of how we re-engage in the world, by giving less reasons for those who are organizing against us to recruit members to their cause.
Senator Cappiello, you have 1 minute to ask the second question.
Thank you. And just to be clear, do we have 2 questions each or 3?
Two questions each.
Okay. Congressman, you've objected to my questioning of your contributions that you've received as a member of the House Financial Services Committee in the context of your vote on the bailout. And for people who here, so you know, the Financial Services Committee oversees Wall Street, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. If your objection is sincere, will you right now apologize for using that same line of attack against Nancy Johnson 2 years ago when you ran against her? And I quote from one of your ads, "Those are all of Nancy Johnson's drug company contributions. No wonder we got a raw deal."
Well, there's no secret that Nancy Johnson, when she wrote the 2003 prescription drug bill, allowed the drug industry to essentially write that bill. That's why we have in it a provision that states that the federal government is prohibited from negotiating directly with the drug companies. There's no state legislator, there's no federal legislator that would have ever contemplated putting that provision in the bill. It simply is something that the drug industry asked for. And it's why when I was elected, one of the first pieces of legislation that I introduced was to repeal that provision. That can save us $50 billion in our Medicare line item. The association with those contributions led to a congresswoman who allowed that industry to write the bill. In this case, it's been exactly the opposite. I do sit on the Financial Services Committee, but within 4 months of taking control of Congress, the Democrats passed a reform bill of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that hadn't been passed in the last decade. Within 6 months, a predatory lending bill cracking down on the subprime lenders was passed. Real action within the first 12 months. And I think that this issue of contributions is one that Senator Cappiello has to be careful about. Not only has he taken money from political action committees that I disagree with in this campaign, whether it be R.J. Reynolds or Pfizer or major pharmaceutical companies that supported Nancy Johnson, but over the 10, 12 years that Senator Cappiello has been in the state legislature, he's gladly accepted political action committee contributions while he's been an incumbent. He's had over a decade to set an example as an incumbent. A lot of Senator Cappiello's campaign and much of his campaign advertising has been about this issue of contributions. I have a list of your contributions that I disagree with. You have a list of contributions that I disagree with. I think we've got to get beyond these kind of accusations and start talking about your plans and my plans for making this country a better place. I think that's what people want to hear from us over the course of the next 6 days.
1 minute response.
Thank you. I actually have here a list of my contributions. I have been asking Congressman Murphy to show his list. They're on the FEC website to let people know exactly the contributions he's received. His attack against his opponent 2 years ago was she received drug company money and she voted for a bad bill, gave us a raw deal. He may have been right, but if you apply that standard, then sitting in the Financial Services Committee, he's received easily over $250,000 directly from those PACs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Citigroup, and the like. And he oversees them and then voted for this bailout bill with no oversight whatsoever. Those Wall Street firms were begging for that bailout bill with no oversight, and those execs are going to get massive bonuses now because of it. I have been willing to move forward. I have made the offer 1.5 years ago when I first got involved in the race and said to Congressman Murphy, let's neither one of us accept these PAC contributions. He declined that. But I'm telling you here today that if I am elected as the congressman and the incumbent, I will set the standard and I will simply say no to those contributions. He is yet to say that.
Congressman Murphy, you have 1 minute to ask the next question.
And again, let me just reiterate, I think past performance is the best indication of future performance. And on that case, Senator Cappiello has had 12 years to set the standard that he's suggesting today, and he hasn't done it. And I think it's no mystery that we're standing on the precipice of an election, and the tune has changed. Let me try.
Hold on, please.
That wasn't asking me a question.
Well, he had 30 seconds, another 30 seconds, I believe, right? League of Women Voters to get to that question. So
okay,
let him get to that.
So I assume the next question will be another attempt to score political points. So let me try to ask another question that could get at some real differences on issues of vision between us. We're both young candidates. We both have young families. We both, I think, are concerned about the fact that all of this negativity is causing young people to walk away from politics, to walk away from wanting to participate in the process. You and I, for however long we stand on this earth, will still be involved in public service. No matter what happens in this election, how can you and I work together after this election to try to restore young people's faith in politics and political institutions?
2-minute answer.
First, we can do what I've already done. If we're going to restore faith in our political institutions and our government, we can start by looking at ourselves, Congressman, when we get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say that we are going to be different than those that we criticize in Congress. The congressman likes to point the finger at Congress. The one thing he forgets is you are Congressman. You are there. You have not stepped up. You have accepted these contributions. You refused my offer to not accept Political Action Committee contributions. I'm saying that I will be different. And when I stood up to my former governor, when he was corrupt, that was extremely difficult for me to do. It was, you yourself asked for him to resign. But I know recently you have sought out his help. If you're going to stand up, then you have to stand up and look at yourself and say the change has to start here. You can't just point the finger at the other party or the administration. You have to look at yourself, and that's what I'm willing to do.
1-minute response.
Let's take a look at our histories of reform and move forward from there. On the 3 major reforms that Governor Rell proposed to the state legislature in the wake of the Rowland scandal, someone who I have not asked for the support of. 3 major reforms: ethics reform, campaign finance reform, and contractor reform. There was one member of the state Senate who voted against all 3. Only one. That was State Senator Cappiello. Not only did I support them, but I was in the room trying to get those bills done. Senator Cappiello will explain that he had reasons for for opposing all 3 of them. But on the fundamental reforms that are proposed here in the state legislature, Senator Cappiello has been the only one who stood on the outside. Not only did I support them, but I led the fight for several of them. So the question going forward is who is going to be more likely to go to Washington and pass the types of reform there that we've had here? Who's going to be more likely to pass the types of process reform that will restore young people's faith in politics? And on that score, I think it's very clear whose history indicates future performance.
Senator Cappiello, you have the last question. 1 minute to ask it.
Thank you. I will ask by starting by saying this. First of all, the congressman repeats that same lie over and over again. The Governor Rell did not introduce the contracting reform bill that he speaks of that I voted against. She vetoed that bill. I was the one member of Congress, the Senate, proud to vote no, and she vetoed that bill. And we finally passed a good bill this year. I proposed and passed ethics reform legislation to take away the pensions for corrupt officials. Supported it, proposed it, passed it. Campaign finance reform, the congressman is right. I don't support you, the taxpayers paying for my campaigns. He does. And on the one big ethics vote this year, the one vote that he championed, had 2 press conferences on this vote, on this bill. He was going to stand up his own leadership in D.C. and New Britain. He had big press conferences. He was the only freshman to miss that vote. He missed the vote. He was there minutes earlier, but he missed the vote. Didn't spend the time. So, Congressman, my quick question to you is, I know that you've said that Governor Rowland had nothing to do with raising money. You did not seek out his support, but he did send an email out and partially take place in a fundraiser for you. Why did you not publicly denounce that money and say you wouldn't accept it and cancel that fundraiser?
Well, there was a fundraiser thrown by the members of the Waterbury Chamber of Commerce, and apparently Governor Rowland sent out an email. He now works at the Chamber of Commerce. The fact is that the Chamber of Commerce in Waterbury supports my campaign because I support the business community there, because we've done important work together to try to grow our fragile economy in Waterbury. And I'm proud of my association with the Waterbury Chamber, and I'm frankly proud of the support that I've received from them. Their support for me is not only because I'm trying to help revitalize a city that has fallen on hard times, but because with $44 billion in tax decreases that we voted for businesses, that makes a difference for chambers of commerce throughout this district. The fact that I'm the one standing up to the plate to try to pass real comprehensive healthcare reform that's going to ultimately lower the cost of doing business, the cost of providing healthcare to the residents of Waterbury, the residents of Danbury, and the state chambers of commerce are supporting me. So I am proud of the fact that I've gotten support from that chamber of commerce and other throughout this district. And I think it talks about and it speaks to the work that I hope to do in the next 2 years as we rebuild this economy. We're going to have to learn from our mistakes, but we're also going to have to step up to the plate and pass more relief for those businesses that make up the Danbury Chamber, the Waterbury Chamber, the New Britain Chamber, that are going to rebuild this economy going forward.
1 minute response.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the Waterbury Chamber of Commerce did not endorse you, Congressman. Individual members, including former Governor Rowland, has endorsed you. They have supported you. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has endorsed me, which encompasses all chambers, Danbury, Waterbury, New Britain, all of the chambers. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, small business owners, they have endorsed me because they know that I have a much better plan to target a relief for small business owners. I know so because my dad, who opened up his business 45 years ago, October 4th, he came from nothing. A family of 8 children of Italian immigrants came from nothing and built something for my family, for my children, for my brother and sister. And you know what really, really upsets me about this entire issue with this bailout last month? Is that in all the tough times that my father's been through, there have been good years and there have been bad years, but never once did Congress ever say to my dad, I'm here to bail you out.
Thank you. We have the closing statements, and Senator Cappiello, you go first with a 3-minute closing statement, followed by Congressman Murphy with 3 minutes. Senator Cappiello.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank everyone for putting this debate together, the News Times, the Portuguese Cultural Center, and Chris for moderating this debate as well. You and I have a connection at Western Connecticut State University, and I deeply am grateful. And I sincerely want to thank Congressman Murphy. In spite of this debate and this, we go at each other sometimes, but we actually like each other when we're not standing up here on stage.
I'd like you to go around.
Do I get time when he closes now? In the state Senate, there are no sides. We sit in a circle. Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. I'm surrounded right now by 2 Democrats, and we talk, and we engage in debate, and we try and get things done. It's a symbol that I take to heart. I have been so proud to serve and represent the people of the 24th District for the last 10 years, and the 138th District for 4 years before that, and proud to represent most of you who are in this audience today. It was an honor for me. I never took it for granted, and I want to thank you for all of your years of support. But sometimes when people leave that circle, they forget what it means to work together. They simply point fingers at one another and say it's the administration's fault, it's the other party's fault. We've got to get past that. We have to have people who are going to represent us in Washington, D.C., who are going to start by changing the way they themselves act. There are only 435 members of Congress and 100 U.S. senators. If we're going to make a change in Washington, D.C., if we're going to set an example for people back home, we need to start by looking at ourselves. We talk about this massive debt that's growing by individual members here in the audience may have large credit card bills, mortgage payments that are tough to pay. But how does Congress lead? Congress leads by spending trillions of dollars it doesn't have. That's got to stop. We need people who are going to go to Washington, D.C., who are not going to simply say yes to their leadership. Someone is going to take a stand and say, you know what? Whether it's their governor, whether it's their Senate leader, their House leader, or their president, I disagree with you. Now, my opponent has voted with his leadership 98% of the time. I don't know when he's really taking a stand against them. I will. I have a proven track record in my Senate district and in the House, and I will do it for you in the 5th Congressional District. Finally, I just want to thank all of you again, my family, my beautiful wife, my mom and dad, because I'll tell you what, I'm here because of what my mom and dad have done. The reputation that they built for me in this community gave me the chance, gave me the opportunity to run for council in 1993 and state rep in 1994 and the state senate in 1998. People gave me the benefit of the doubt because of them. Luckily, I built upon that, and I think I've built a strong base of support. But I'm here to tell you, Mom and Dad, thank you for everything you've done. I love you.
Congressman Murphy, you have 3 minutes.
Well, let me add my thanks to Senator Cappiello. This is the last of what I think have been 5 good debates, and to thank you for being here to participate in it. But I do think that you have seen tonight a pretty clear difference between how we approach this campaign and how I think we both approach politics. Senator Cappiello couldn't get through 10 seconds of his opening statement without attacking. He used the questions that he had to make political points about supporters and contributions, instead of talking about the issues that really affect the families of Danbury and of this district, instead of trying to engage in a dialogue about how we fix our broken economy, instead of talking about the threats presented to this country, instead of talking about health care, instead of talking about energy reform. He used that time to talk about political accusations that in the end, I think have much less bearing, if any at all, to all of our lives than those big, broad, important questions. I'm here tonight to talk about solutions. I brought 2 questions tonight to try to engage in a conversation about those solutions. And I just hope that the rest of the campaign follows in that spirit. Because I come back to where I started. I mean, I think about my young son at home, and I don't want him to grow up in a world in which he's ashamed of the fact that his father chose to go into politics. Now, that happens by politicians having the courage, as both David and I have done in the past, to stand up to our party. Whether it be Senator Cappiello's work in the state legislature or my work in this past Congress to lead the fight to pass an ethics reform bill that the old guard in both the Republican and Democratic caucus had stopped from happening for 20 years. That's an accomplishment I'm proud of. But how I make a world in which people want to be active in politics, in which my son doesn't feel bad about the fact that his father has chosen this profession, is also in how I conduct myself in this debate and how I conduct myself in this campaign. You've seen 2 very different visions here, as you have throughout the course of this campaign. Attack ads from one side and solutions, and talk about what our positive vision is going forward. I'm not ashamed of that. I don't see any weakness in standing up and running a positive campaign. I think it's what people want throughout this district and throughout the state. And I think they especially want it right now, when there are so many challenges and so many threats to this country. I am an unapologetic idealist about what we can do going forward. We are in a moment of great economic crisis for this country, but I see in that crisis opportunity. I see an opportunity to tackle healthcare reform and make it more affordable for both businesses and individuals. I see an opportunity to tackle energy reform as well. And in the process, I think that we can rise to these great challenges and try to lift up the political dialogue in the process. I don't think this has happened from Senator Cappiello in the course of this debate or this campaign. And I hope that we get to set a very different tone going forward in the next Tuesday. Thank you very much for allowing us to do that.
Again, this evening, on behalf of the Portuguese Cultural Center, we'd like to thank you, the audience, for your respect and your decorum this evening. Thank you, audience. And we'd also like to thank the panelists and our moderator, and of course the candidates one more time. Thank you for joining us. And lastly, on behalf of the Portuguese Cultural Center, if you'd like to help us pay the electrical bill, the tavern and the restaurant are open downstairs. Please join us again. It's open to the entire community, and sample our wonderful cuisine and culture. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Drive safely home.